Assalamu alaikum, dear brothers and sisters. I'm your host, Mohamed Abbas Kirmani, and welcome back to another episode of They Ask You, brought to you by Blessed Tree Media. So today's episode is titled The Ziyarat Ashura and the Broader Question of La'ana, where we explore the authenticity of this well-known ziyarat, especially from the angle of whether the part on cursing the oppressors is a part of the original ziyarat, and where this notion stands from this perspective of Islam in general. So, honoring us today from Toronto, Canada, is Sheikh Dr. Vinay Khetia, who is a well known scholar who serves the Shia community, especially in the West, is an established academic, and an Imam Jummah at the Jafri Community Centre of Toronto. Sheikh will be helping us delve further into this very interesting topic. Respected Sheikh Vinay, Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alaikum salam. It really is an honor to have you here with us, and I'm sure our audience, as well as myself, are really keen to hear from your knowledge and your insight. Just before we start, though, I'd like to remind our audience, if you guys have any burning questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat box below. Alternatively, you can use our other social media, such as Instagram and Facebook, to leave any questions, queries, stories, or reflections, or just any general comments you have on the topic. As always, please do follow us on social media. And also, if you have missed the last two episodes, don't worry, you can click on Blessed Tree Media and see episode 1 and 2 on our channel. So without further ado, Sheikh Vinay, I'd like to start off with our first question. I feel like I've been talking a lot, but our first question is, I think this is also for the youth of our community. We hear the word la'an a lot, and la'ana, but to set the scene of this topic, what is la'ana, and what does it mean?
Yeah, la'ana is a kind of imprecation or malediction, rather. It's essentially it's a concept in Arabic, which is in Arabic literature, religious Arabic literature, which is essentially praying against somebody, right? So praying for God to strike someone down. There's different kinds of la'an, right? La'an has different kinds of manifestations. La'an, it can be like if somebody wants to distance themselves from somebody completely, they do la'an of that person to kind of say that, I'm completely removed from you, disassociated from you. It is strong language. It is very, very strong language. And it essentially is asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to remove his mercy from an individual, right? So this is what we see in some of the Arabic early lexicography, books of Arabic lexicography, and in the tafasir literature, which deal with the various verses that use the word la'an, which is used throughout the Quran. So that is essentially what it means in a more literal sense.
Okay, thank you for that answer. And I just wanted to go from what you said in terms of lexically. How has it been used lexically in an Islamic sense, in more detail, if you don't mind?
Yeah, well, we go back to the Quran again, right? Where Allah says, for example, la'natullahi ala mathalan, ala zalimin, mathalan. Just giving an example there, for example, al-kathibin. I don't remember the exact examples, but I mean, it's the same meaning there, where God essentially is God's damnation is upon them. That God's damnation, God's condemnation, So what is implied when God condemns someone? That God takes his mercy away from somebody. So if God's mercy is not with someone, then his wrath is with somebody. There's no middle position with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Either we are covered by his mercy or we are under his wrath. It's not like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes a break or something like that, right? We're either under his mercy or we're under his wrath, right? So la'an basically means someone is condemned, and that also meaning condemned to hell.
Wow. Okay.
By Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when Allah does la'an.
I see.
Quran, right? So Allah is saying that people with those attributes, oppressors, those who reject the Prophet, and do so with that kind of negativity towards Islam, with that sense of hostility towards the deen.
mm,
um those that take the property of others, this kind of ghasb and dhulm and tughyan. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala invokes his la'an upon those people, or those people that play that you know especially when it comes to the deen, they mislead people intentionally away from the truth. So
mm,
these are the things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala um, brings down his damnation. You could think of it almost like proverbially to be like God's ultimate punishment for somebody. It's very strong
mm.
language.
Wow, yeah, sounds like strong language. So I think you already spoke about this a little bit, but in terms of the Quran, does it like explicitly say la'ana in the Quran on
Yeah,
particular
so
people?
many
Yeah.
places. It's very
Wow,
common.
I see. Okay. And
Yeah,
actually,
it's used. The word la'an is used in the Quran in both verbal noun form and verb form.
oh, I see. Okay. And actually, that brings me on to another question here. You know, when, let's say, non-Muslims are reading the Quran, or someone's researching about the Quran, um, f- and they hear la'an and la'ana, of course, like you said, it's about cursing the individual, um, sending them to hell. But in their mind, they're thinking, Allah's so merciful. Why would He do something like this? So, how would you answer that to a non-Muslim who's asking these
I mean, I would
questions?
go to the Bible. Why did God destroy other nations that came before and the people of Lot and so on and so forth? Is that not a form of God's punishment or God's curse upon a people? Of course it is.
Mm,
Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chooses how he wishes to both show mercy and to punish. I mean, that's within the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Nothing is complete and absolute. It's in Allah's hands. And the Quran
mm,
has plenty of examples as well when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala condemns a people or condemns a specific individual for what they've done.
mm,
Um, and no religion, I wouldn't say no religion, but at least in my
mm,
study of religion, no
mm,
religion is only about mercy,
mm,
or at least most. I mean, there's always this angle of what does God do with the oppressors? Here, we're not speaking about sinners, individual sinners. We're talking about people whose structures and systems of oppression and tyranny have had such a profound effect on the society, on family, on the world, that they have to be taken into account. This is not a
mm,
small matter of a personal sin or personal failings. This is something that is, you know, so deep and such profound sense of corruption and wanton disregard
mm,
for principles of justice and principles of fair play and principles of human dignity,
mm,
that those individuals, you know, provoke the ire of God, like the Pharaoh or, people like that, right? So,
mm,
um, La'ana, when viewed from that angle, I mean, at least as a scholar of religious studies or someone that studies religious studies, studies with scholars of religious studies,
mm,
none of this is unusual. I mean, maybe I'm speaking from the vantage point of scholarship, but I think the average person who reads these texts is aware that there's communities that are cursed and communities that are blessed. Um, that's in any religious tradition, almost. Islam is not unique in this way.
I see. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense actually. And you know, in terms of, again, La'an, there certain people they might have La'an on them, but does Allah's mercifulness and forgiveness sort of stretch more, if that makes sense? So if they were to ask for like true forgiveness, Would that but would that still count even though they're corrupted people? If that makes sense.
Um, well, look at someone like Hur.
Hmm.
So if he didn't make the choice that he did, he would be counted among those that are mal'unin, right? That were responsible for the killing of Imam al-Hussein, although he was responsible for so many things up to that point that he made that change. So Allah knows best.
Hmm.
However, this brings us up to an interesting conversation here about la'na, which is that when the imams of Ahlul Bayt salamullahi alayhim do perform la'na on somebody,
Hmm.
does that mean that Allah will forgive them or their dua is absolutely mustajab? Allahu alam. But the imam, out of his infallibility and isma, as per Shi'i doctrine, of course, a Sunni wouldn't believe in this, but as per 12 or Shi'i doctrine, um, that would be pretty firm, right? So, for example, if the imam says, "Oh Allah, don't ever forgive any one of them,"
Hmm.
Allahumma la taghfir lahum abada, right? It's not lan, but it's similar, basically saying that damn them all to hell, the
Hmm.
killers of Imam al Hussein, right? On different occasions, we see Imam al Hussein on the day of Ashura making such kind of supplications. Um, is that Imam Hussein being unfair? Is that Imam Hussein, na'udhu billah, being not the lovey-dovey Imam Hussein? I'm being sarcastic here.
Hmm.
I think some people have maybe, or some individuals maybe have a misunderstanding of what religion is sometimes. There's two sides. There's the justice side and there's the mercy side. And yes, the mercy side is God's mercy outweighs his wrath. It does. Otherwise, we would all end up in hell, or majority of us would end up in hell.
Hmm.
But for those that are responsible for great crimes against the human race, the humanity,
Hmm.
there's a special place in hell for those individuals. And those are like the killers of Ahlul Bayt, or those that instituted the crimes against Ahlul Bayt. And we see examples of the Aimma, especially Imam Hussein alayhi salam, praying against them,
Hmm.
whether it's using the word la'an or not or something else, but it certainly is a form of la'an. I mean, you're saying, oh God, don't forgive them. God, count every one of them. God, slay every one of them. Waqtulhum, right?
Hmm.
So it's within that same genre of we would say cursing, not in terms, cursing in the sense of wishing ill for
Hmm.
somebody. And that's not for someone off the streets, or someone that's murdered, that's responsible for murder and pillaging the possessions of the family of the Prophet.
Yeah.
But yes, I mean, would forgiveness be open to such an individual? I mean, if Allah is gonna forgive somebody like that after the cursing of the Imam actually cursing them,
Hmm.
then I mean, I don't know. I mean, in that case, I mean, we could all basically do almost anything that we want in life.
Hmm. Yeah, good response. I like that. Speaking of, you know, like in modern day, of course, like times are a lot different now. So murderers and people that are very high up the criminal scale, would could La'ana be put onto them because they're murderers and they're killing innocent people, let's say, for example? Or is it just for the people that you know, are corrupt towards the Prophet and the Ahlul Bayt? Or could it be
That's a
anyone on
good
the scale?
question. That's a good
Mm,
question. Yeah. So like Saddam Hussein, for
mm,
example, right? The thousands of people that he killed. Um, yeah. I mean, in principle, yes.
mm,
But I mean, someone like who commits a single murder and then is convicted for that murder in this life.
yeah.
I don't know. I'm not one to make a judgment, about these things. What we know is about what the Ahlul Bayt have said, what the Quran tells us. But if you look at the principles of dhulm, the
Mm,
principles that the Quran lays down against those upon whom the la'na of Allah is due and put upon, then we could technically apply those principles elsewhere if you understand the principles of the Quran of who the kadhibin are. Kadhibin doesn't necessarily mean someone that just, it's somebody that's like projects the religion, makes things up about the deen, causes mass corruption in the earth, fills the earth with corruption, is a means of corruption in the earth. Um, people that kill en masse, maybe even not en masse, maybe just with that one person, because the one who kills one person is if they've killed all of humanity. But does that mean that Allah will not forgive them if they're punished in this world and they go through the punishment? I mean, then what's the point of having that worldly punishment, right? As well. But then for some people, you're just gonna go and kill thousands and tens of thousands of people, and you're just one life. I mean, how do you make up for that at that point, right? So it's like, is Saddam's execution enough for his sins to all be forgiven? No, I think from what we see, he was not repentful resort at all up to the last moment. Right? He was an arrogant, terrible, barbaric tyrant who, butchered, I don't know what, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, especially Shia, but doesn't matter. They're human beings, most importantly. So does that mean God will forgive him? I mean, these are sins of such huge proportion, right? So la'natullah ala zalimeen, I mean, just invoke Allah's la'an on Saddam. It doesn't necessarily, I mean, at the end of the day, Allah knows. We don't. But simply from a theological point of view, looking at this theologically, I wouldn't see a problem in it. Zahiran, just looking at it externally.
Yeah, of course.
But then it's misused as like a backyard, as like a household weapon. Oh, I don't like this guy, I'm gonna do lan on him, But then it doesn't mean, I mean, that lan could just boomerang then against you. If you, for example, we have sayings as well that basically the lan that's misused comes back on the person who's using it.
So in that sense, sorry, I interrupted you.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Yeah, let's say there was someone, that they had lost their child, someone murdered their child. That person's very emotional and angry, and they curse the murderer. How does that work, or is that something?
Yeah, sure. I mean, Imam Hussein's child. I'm not comparing the Imam Hussein's, but I'm saying his child was murdered. He cursed the person. A child is an innocent, masoom human being on this earth. The child did not provoke. I mean, people that kill children. I mean, these are the most vile, terrible human beings. They're heartless, and yeah, of course. I mean, now whether Allah accepts that dua or not, that's up to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We know the ma'soom's dua is always mustajab. And the supplication of an infallible is different from the supplication of someone like us. Those are two different things. But to invoke la'an on a killer, I mean, these things are, again, terrible crimes against humanity.
Yeah, thank you for that answer. And that actually moves me on nicely to my next question. Would you say there's a connection between la'na and mourning?
100%. We look at the traditions, and we see that whenever there is some great sadness, right? For example, when we look in the Ziyarat, there's but there's lines that describe the heavens and the earth weeping. This massive sense of grief, this explosive grief that is occurring, this cosmic sense of grief that is occurring, what I would call this cosmological suffering that's centered on the person of Abu Abdullah, of Imam and Hussein. Right, the sky turning red for a year when Hussein was killed, as it was with Yahya ibn Zakaria alayhim as-salam. And there is this parallel you could draw between this cosmic mourning over an injustice that has occurred against an individual, especially a pious individual like Hussein ibn Ali, salamullahi alayhi, or Yahya ibn Zakaria, Nabi Yahya ibn Zakaria, alayhi salam, and divine vengeance and wrath. I mean, just think logically here for a moment, right? So let's put our logical hats on here for a moment and just think about this. You have this cosmological reverberation of cosmological suffering. Heavens, earth, everything that's between it. A'damul musiba wa jallat wa adamat, right? So on and so forth. These are all different words that are used in Ziyarat Ashura. Not only Ziyarat Ashura, and many of the Ziyarat literature and the ahadith. Would this not be coupled with some kind of massive damnation for those that perpetrated those crimes? I mean, the two and two they go hand in hand almost, or they do rather, not even almost. So cosmic mourning, cosmic crying, like when the universe reacts in a state of, like the universe is aghast at the crime that has been committed, at the audacity of the criminals that committed that crime. So what's the response then? I mean, what is the result? What are the ramifications of universal condemnation of something? Is it, oh, let's pray for this person's forgiveness? I don't think so. I don't, not from, at least from a Shi'i Imami theological perspective, no. Providing that person's guilt is certain, right? So that cosmological suffering becomes coupled with the divine damnation of that individual. These two go hand in hand.
I see. Yeah, when you were talking, I was thinking about in terms of Amals as well, and there's Ziyarat Ashura. We're all there mourning, and in this Amals, we're also in terms of La'ana. So it all again like mixes in together. I understand what you're saying now in my head. But thank you so much, Sheikh Vinay. We are gonna go now for a short break, but please don't go anywhere. We'll be right back for a part 2 of today's episode titled Ziyarat Ashura and the broader question of La'ana. So please do stay tuned.
Today, access to clean and safe water is still not available in every part of the world. 1 in 10 people don't have access to water close to home. A child dies every 2 minutes due to dirty water. Your donations have been providing life-saving access to water for millions of people around the world. Help us give vulnerable communities access to water. Donate to our Ali Asghar Water Appeal today and help provide clean and safe water to families around the world.
Many people would love to undertake Hawza studies or to learn Arabic, but for most of them, attending a classroom-based program to fulfill that ambition is not a viable option. Introducing Hausa Online. Learn Hausa studies and Arabic from the comfort of your home. From expert teachers with decades of experience and with the blessing of His Eminence Sayyid Ali Hussein Sistani. Visit hausaonline.org.
Wassalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome back to part two of They Ask You, where we've been discussing Ziyarat Ashura and the broader question of La'na. So, as always, you can always participate by giving us a like, comment, or asking your questions, and also sharing our Blessed Tree Media social media pages. So, back to you, Sheikh Vinay. Thank you for your previous answers. I'd like to move on to another question now. So, if we take a bird's eye view on the issue of La'na, what is the general imami, the 12 position on La'na, would you say?
Um, yeah, that's something that seems to have definitely crystallized by the time of the fifth and the sixth imams. Not that it didn't exist before, it certainly did, but in the way it was expressed, that there was certainly an association between those who denied the imamat of the imams, beginning with the imam of Amir al-Mu'mineen, going all the way forward, that the denial and then the wanton disregard for the rights of the Ahlul Bayt and obstruction of that, just obstruction of their rights, like obstruction in them obtaining their rights, or even going even further than obstruction, which is an oppression of them. All of this would kind of come under the basket of Lana, because it's essentially an act of playing, of rejecting the will of God, right? So it's for 12 Shi'is, it would almost become equivalent to a kind of rejection of the Prophet. I'm not saying it's the same as rejection of the Prophet, but because they are the proof of God on earth, and their authority is the same as that of the Prophet, except for the fact that there's no new there's no revelation that comes to them. And they don't create new legislation, like entirely new Sharia, right? That comes from the Prophet. But their authority and the obedience that's due to them is equivalent. So if that concept is affirmed in Imami thought, then naturally the one who outrightly has animosity towards them or obstructs what Imamiyya would view to be the truth, then they would be mustahiq, or that person would be mustahiq, would be deserving of God's condemnation, because that person would be viewed as obstructing or attempting to obstruct the haqq, the truth, as the Quran describes, right? Those that obstruct the haqq and cause dalal and misguidance in the earth. They would, from an Imami perspective, Shi'i Imami perspective, certainly then fall into that category. As Imami Shi'ism is, in looking at it from a bird's eye view, as a kind of complete package, yes.
I see. Thank you very much.
And I should just follow this point up, that what I bring up here is not is not controversial. I mean,
Mm,
um, this
yeah,
is this is kind of what how Imami Shiism would view Imami Twelver Shiism would view the matter, at least according to my reading of Imami Shiism. People are free to disagree with me, though. Yeah.
I see. Okay, thank you. I like that answer. Thank you very much. And actually, you would just mention about the fifth or sixth Imams, and we'll circle back to Ziyarat Ashura here. Could this be traced back to the fifth or sixth Imam, or is it just a product of the Ghulat of that era? In terms of what are the more broader considerations in this matter, would you say?
You see, the legacy of the fifth and especially of the sixth Imam is highly debated among Muslims, right? Because Sunnis would consider the sixth Imam to be like their Imam. Not in the sense of being Ma'soom, but they consider him to be a great scholar, Ja'far ibn Muhammad, salamullahi alayhi, and they consider him to be a pious scholar, leader of the community in Medina. You know, if you read the works of Sunni scholars about Imam as-Sadiq alayhi salam, glowing with praise about him. Now, naturally, a Sunni scholar would not accept the Shia narrative. There's no way. They wouldn't. It's impossible. Because the very Ja'far as-Sadiq salamullahi alayhi that he believes and respects and looks up to is the very same Ja'far as-Sadiq that many Shias believe, you know,
Yeah.
invoked lan upon early members of the Muslim community, if not by name, let us say by reference, by ishara.
Mm,
Right? There's a debate about lan by name. I think that the traditions about lan by name, I remember the late Ayatollah Sayyid Muhammad Hussein al-Jalali telling me that it's highly debatable about lan by name, but lan by ishara, by reference to something, has more foundation, you know, historically. Now the question is, how much of this is from ghulat, from extremists, and how much is this from the Imam himself? Ooh, that's a tough question, Muhammad Abbas. You know, that's really getting into the weeds now and trying to sort it out. It all depends on your perspective of what ghulu is. If you consider ghulu to be la'an, then yes. But I'll ask one question here. Yes, the ghulat were associated with la'an. There were aspects of the ghulat. But does that mean that anything that's associated with the ghulat becomes completely divorced from any other kind of Shiism? So, for example, the ghulat believed in the imamat of Amir al-Mu'mineen. So does that mean that, just because one item may be within the inventory of some of the beliefs of the ghulat, does that mean that those beliefs cannot be shared by non-ghulat? We have to look at this is something that Hassan Ansari brings up very well. And he argues that no, this is not necessarily the case. And we see that within Shiism, the repudiation, at least in the Imami branch, not the Zaydis, because the Zaydis have a different approach to this, but within the Imami branch of Shiism, the repudiation of members of the early Muslim community that were seen to have usurped the rights of the Imams and Sayyid Zahra salamullahi alayhim ajma'een were open for condemnation. And again, thinking about this logically, thinking about their position in the community, what the Quran describes about their position, the consequences of misguiding people, the consequences of misleading people, the consequences of hiding the truth in the Quran, and then asking yourself, being intellectually honest about the subject, and saying that is it possible that the Imams of Ahlul Bayt would just put their hands up and say, we don't know about anybody, we don't want to judge anybody, we love our forefathers, we believe Amir al-Mu'mineen was the Imam after the Prophet. But as for those people who rejected him or oppressed him or went to war with him in Siffin, Jamal and Siffin, we pray for all of them, Jami'an. May Allah. No, that's the Sunni perspective. That's the Sunni narrative. So what would make Tashayyuh different from Tasannum then? I mean, this becomes very hard to chew on because of the implications of this, right? Because the implications, if we're being intellectually honest about the subject, the implications of this are enormous. Because if you take the principles of Imami Shiism to their furthest conclusion, you tell me. If you take the principles of the Imama, the principles of Wilaya, the principles of nothing has been emphasized like Wilaya has been emphasized, and that the true understanding of Tawheed from an Imami perspective, again, a Sunni would completely reject this, would be aghast, would be offended by this. If you take the principles of the Imamiyah to their furthest conclusion, this is something Ethan Kohlberg says himself. It's not only Muslims, non-Muslims. Kohlberg says this. The scholar from University, I think Jerusalem or somewhere he is, but he's written many, many books on Shiism, even lived in Iraq for a time, I think in the 60s, in Najaf. Not that I'm saying that he's an authentic source. I'm just giving another example of someone who has, who's looked at Shiism from a bird's eye view. Even Kohlberg says, it is what it is. Then really what makes Imamiyah? If the position on Wilaya and Imama and this specific succession of Imams and leaders is not what it is in Imami Shiism, then what is the logical consequence of those that killed them or those who oppressed them or those that, as Shiis would view, intentionally misguided people? I mean, it's even without going to the riwayat and debating about the riwayat themselves, just look at it from a logical perspective here, based on the principles of Imami Shiism. Then what is Imami Shiism? I mean, I'm not talking about Imami Shiism as what we want it to be as an identity marker. I'm talking about Imami Shiism as to what is the understanding of the ideas and the thoughts of the Imams, of Imam al-Rida, of Imam al-Kadhim, of Imam al-Sadiq, of Imam al-Baqir. Now, yes, mixed in that tradition are also traditions praising the Sahaba. Here and there, they're found. But could that be for the purpose of taqiyya, for the purpose of dissimulation? I think so. Because when you weigh it all out, I think certainly what I've mentioned, as opposed to praising the people who took the rights of Amir al-Mu'mineen, I think the former outweighs the latter of what I've just mentioned, which is the narrative of condemnation versus the narrative of praise, or the narrative of let's all just pray for each other and love each other until the day of judgment, and we'll just leave everything to God. Shiism almost here then becomes the party of protest, a kind of pious protest. Even if the Imam is not openly revolting against the government, and there's different theological reasons for that after Imam Hussein alayhi salam, which is a different discussion, right? And Ziyarat Ashura points to that whole issue of the concept of waiting for the imam to come and all of this. But nevertheless, there is this feeling of justified righteous indignation towards being wronged and being usurped of one's rights, of divinely appointed rights. And this is, again, not my only conclusion. You can go to Eden Kohlberg, Maria Dakaki, other people. I mean, non-Muslims who write on this subject as well, who've looked vastly at the tradition from a bird's eye view to try to understand it. I mean, Muslims and non-Muslims alike. I'm not saying everyone comes to this conclusion, but this seems to be the predominant conclusion. Now, another point to take into account here is, like I said, sorting through the weeds. How much of this goes back to extremist elements within the circles of the sixth Imam, and how much of this can actually go back to the sixth Imam? How much can we know for certain? How much can we not know for certain? This becomes a whole... This is a difficult issue. I mean, I'm not going to just say, oh, yeah, 100% certain we know everything, 100% to the bank. No, that would be intellectually dishonest, and that would be intellectual, that would be lacking intellectual humility to state that. But I think there are very, 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 very extreme high probability that the condemnation of, at least by reference, if not explicit, at least by reference to the early community, when looking at it from a general Imami Twelver perspective, can be traced back to the Imams of Ahlul Bayt. I believe that. Yeah, I believe that, and I'm at peace with that myself, academically. But each is their own, but I'm at peace with that.
Sant. I like that answer. It's a very clear answer that I got, and I understood everything you were saying, which is great, and I'm sure our audience did. And like you said, there are different conclusions to what you just said as well, as in all have the same conclusion as well. It's not just your opinion, which is great. And this actually, I think you mentioned this just before in your answer, but we were talking about name or by ishara. So ishara, to those of you who don't know, means an indication to specific people. But just for our youth, if we could get a difference of what's the difference between la'an by name or la'an by ishara, because indication to specific people and name sort of sounds similar. So what would you say the
So
difference
for
is?
example, someone says, "Oh Allah, send your invoke the la'an of Allah upon XYZ," and saying the names of those XYZ people. That's by name.
Okay.
By ishara is awwala dhalimin dhalama haqqa Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Or Allah mukhussa awwalan, right? Or Allah reserved for the first one and the second one and the third one, for example. This is still ishara. Don't really know who it is. For example, Sayyid Muhammad Sayyidina Jalali opines, rahmatullahi ta'ala alayhi, one of my teachers, Sayyid Muhammad Hussein was a student of Al-Wazug, Sayyid al-Khui. He passed away 2 years ago now. He even opines that we're not sure about awwal wa thani wa thalith here, perhaps. Who knows? I mean, about exactly who is referred to here. There is a wisdom to the fact that the Imam kept it open, or at least we'll discuss that maybe in a moment as to whether it's a part of the ziyarah or not. But assuming that it may be a part of the ziyarah, it's still uncertain. Now, the ishara is that there's some kind of succession of people that are being condemned. But I remember the late Sayyid al-Jalali, and I have his book on this matter, says, does it refer to the 3 killers of Imam Hussein? So the Imam Salamullahi alayhim have at times, or perhaps in most occasions, if not the vast majority of occasions, left this as an open-ended question. There's wisdom behind that. Because, as I discussed in my PhD dissertation, the implications of cursing by name openly are enormous, right? And we see that, for example, this cursing by name was especially something that started under the Fatimids, right? The Ismailiyah are no different than the Imamiyah on this. Maybe the Ismailiyah today don't, do this, but the Ismailiyah, the Ismailis of the past, both Bohra and Nizari, going back to the early days of the Fatimid Khalifa al-Hakim, This is what we're talking like the 5th century in Egypt was openly invoking La'an and on early members, very early members of the Muslim community, companions of the Prophet. The killers of Amir al-Mu'mineen, those who fought, for example, against Amir al-Mu'mineen at Jamal. And yeah, it caused a lot of controversy. That doesn't mean that it's the practice of the Aimma, but the Ismailiyya in this case are no different than the. If anything, I would say they were way before the Safavids. I mean, we're talking. This is 5th century, right? Hijri. And they caused quite a stir in Egypt, in North Africa, when they did this. Is it wise to openly say such things? I mean, I'm not in the maqam of giving fatwa, so I'll just stop at that point. But I mean, if you look at the implications of that and the riots that would ensue, and to openly, overtly take the name of early companion and to curse them overtly and openly, I'm talking by name. I'm not talking about the ziyarah that has come down to us, which is a shot. Yeah, I mean, it's going to cause riots. I mean, after all, someone else looks at that person as his or her spiritual hero. You're basically sending their spiritual hero to Jahannam. So, or are they just going to sit back and say, yeah, academically it's fine, it's all good, it's fine matter? I don't think so. It would cause civil strife. Even at the time of Sharif al-Murtada Alam al-Huda, Kohlberg discusses this in his PhD dissertation, which he wrote at Oxford, I think in the 70s. The whole thing is on cursing. This thesis. I'm not saying everything in it is authentic, but there's some historical aspects of it that are very interesting, which is the early scholars of the community would often tussle with the community about this whole concept of publicly, openly naming the khulafa and publicly doing la'an upon them in this way. It was very problematic. Like they would write it in the bathrooms and things like this, and someone would find it, and oh my God, riots would ensue and fights in the street would ensue. And the scholars are saying we're trying to live a life of teaching, we are living within a multi, in a I wouldn't say multicultural, but in a realm where intra-faith coexistence should at least continue without us killing one another. Right? So it wasn't that Sharif al-Murtada or Sheikh al-Mufid believed, or Sharif Murtada or other leaders of the Shia community believed that cursing them by name is wrong, because we do see in some of their books mention of certain elements, but these are in their scholarly texts. It's not necessarily in giving public speeches. But I'm not even sure if they ever did that or not. But the point is that publicly, openly, by name, doing these kinds of things have profound ramifications, and they're viewed by other Muslims as being insidious. Now, this doesn't apply to Ziyarat Ashura. That's something that has come down to us, and the Imams have put it in a certain way for a certain reason. But those people that, would take their name and do it openly by name, I mean, Allah knows. I'm not here saying is, giving fatwa or anything. That's not my position at all. I'm not claiming that. I'm just saying historically, those that did that, there was a reaction. That's all I'm saying. That historically, there's been civil strife when this has been done in a very grandiose, explicit by name manner, whether it be during the Fatimids or later on.
I see. So would you say that, just as a general, if you were to do La'an, Ishara is a better way of going about it, because by name, like you said, it causes a lot of riots, and so would Ishara be the better alternative to use?
again, I mean, looking at this academically, I think that the lan by ishara has a stronger, much stronger foundation as opposed to by name.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you very much for that
That's
answer.
looking at this, just looking at the reports in general and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And now, circling back now to Ziyarat Ashura, I'd like to discuss the manuscripts of Ziyarat Ashura. You know, I think we have touched on this, but are there any, if you could say, some discrepancies with Ziyarat Ashura and the manuscripts, and why is it such a controversy?
It's a controversy because the first, second, and third can very well refer to the first three caliphs. That's why. Otherwise, the other part, Allahumma lan awwala zalimin zalama haqqa Muhammad wa ali Muhammad, right? Wa akhiru tabi' lahu ala dhalik, right? Oh God, remove your mercy from the first one and the one who followed them. So the first one there, who was the first one? I mean, really, looking at this again from a bird's eye view, manuscripts always have discrepancies. Let me just bring this forward here. I work with manuscripts. I edit manuscripts. Manuscripts have discrepancies. Okay? Ziyarat Ashura is no different. There are discrepancies in the manuscripts. There is no doubt. Like, for example, here I have the manuscript from 502 AH, and at the bottom is a la'an. What does it say? Allahumma khassa awwala dhalimin bil la'ani minni wabda'a bihi jami' al-dhalimin. That's it. So this is one of the earliest manuscripts. So you see clearly that there is different wording here. And then it goes, Allahumma la'an Yazid Khamsa. Okay, that's interesting. Or it doesn't say Khamsa. Allahumma la'an Yazid. Right? And then it continues. So this is a different wording here. But then when you go to other manuscripts, there's different wordings. Some of them can be traced back to Ibn Idris al-Hilli. And in those manuscripts, there is the complete lan, awwala, thani, wa thalith, right? First, second, and third. So there is a discrepancy within the manuscripts. It is debated. There is a discussion. The earliest manuscript does not have it. Again, we have to be intellectually honest, not polemical, not apologetic, not emotional about this. We have to be intellectual about this. The earliest manuscript does not have it. However, Ayatollah Nasir Makarim, now I have not seen this manuscript and I don't know anyone who has seen it in my years of looking for it, but he mentions in this book, Mafati, in his edition of Mafati al-Jinan, the Grand Ayatollah Nasir Makarim Shirazi mentions. So he talks about a manuscript that does have the lan, and he says, Nuska Kadimi wa Khatib Misbah. My Farsi is not very good, so I'm just going to read it in English, the translation here. He says is from the 5th century. It's in Kitab Khane Masjid A'zam Marhum Ayatollah Borojardi. It is manuscript number 394, Mawjud Ast. So the lan is in it. Okay? And he says it is Tariq, and it is from the time of Zaman of Sheikh Tusi. So this is from 502 AH. And he says that there is a manuscript which has this Awathani wa Thalith from the time of Sheikh Tusi. I have not seen the manuscript myself. So I've been trying to get a hold of it, and I do discuss this in my dissertation that, look, I have been to Masjid A'zam and looked for this, and I have not seen it. I've spoken to numerous manuscript scholars, but we would have to confirm this with Ayatollah Nasir Makarim, of course. I mean, if that's the case, then now this manuscript would predate this one, which would then change the whole scenario altogether, this would be a game changer then. Yeah. So, however, we must, I again have to mention that numerous manuscripts do not have the lan as it is. This is a debated subject. There is no absolute certainty that it is a part of the Ziyarah. But there are also famous manuscripts that have it, that have isnads that are going back to Ibn Idris al-Hilli or Ibn Sakun or others. And then there are famous manuscripts that don't have it. In both the Misbah al-Saghir and Misbah al-Kabir. Right? Because Shaykh Tusi had two books, Misbah al-Saghir and Misbah al-Saghir. And Kamil al-Ziyarat doesn't have it. Of Ibn Qulaway al-Qummi. It's not in the edition, in the Ziyarat Ashura of Kamil al-Ziyarat. But then the Ziyarat Ashura from Kamil al-Ziyarat never really became the standardized version, interestingly enough. And in fact, Ibn Tawus mentions himself that the edition of Misbah al-Mutahajjid that he had did not have the lam. But then he relied on the Misbah al-Saghir, I believe, from what I remember, which had the lam. So there's a lot of claims and counterclaims about this. And I think one of the reasons that when you look closely at some of the manuscripts, it would seem that there was an original lan and something was erased and copied over a new lan. Meaning that this new watered down lan was copied over something that was originally there. We see that in some of the earliest manuscripts. So who knows what was originally there? But when looking at it again from a bird's eye view, Allahumma la'an awwala zalimin, zalama haqqa Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Okay. So we start with one. So second and third, I mean, it's, see, let me go. We only have a few minutes left, but I need to mention this. And maybe in another show, I know that we're going to have, inshallah, further shows to discuss this. There is historical evidence to indicate that first, that the language of Ziyarat Ashura, al-Mumahideen, all of this, those who paved the way for the killing of Hussein, who are those people? When we go to early Islamic historiography, it becomes evident that those people, by early Islamic historiography, I'm talking about works like Ansab al-Ashraf of Baladari, and from a Shi'i perspective, Waqatu Sifin of al-Minkari, it becomes very clear, again, looking at this from a bird's eye view, I'm looking at this not from an academic, intellectual perspective, not emotionally, atifi, we have to believe in this, we have to believe in this. No, we have to step back and look at it objectively. Putting all the cards on the table, so to speak, you would have to be, it would be difficult to say that the Imamiyya do not have a strong case to believe that the early Muslim community, immediately succeeding the Prophet, were responsible for what happened at Ashur on the 10th day of Muharram. Now, who are those people? They're just some random people from the Badia, from the Sahara and the desert? No. And those people are mentioned in historical works by both the adversaries of Ahlul Bayt and the partisans of Ahlul Bayt. And that's a different discussion. But again, looking at this from an not looking at this from an emotional perspective, looking at this being intellectually honest as to what Imami Shiism makes of all of this. Right? Where does the evidence lead us, both historiographically, textually, right? Devotion, looking at devotional texts, historical texts, theological texts. Bring all the evidence together, look at it in front of you, and ask yourself, who might be those that paved the way for the killing of Hussein? Who might be awwala zalimin zalama haqqa Muhammad wa ali? Who is the first one to oppress Muhammad wa ali Muhammad? It's not awwala zalim al-Hussein. The awwala zalim al-Hasan salamullahi alayhima. Awwala zalim, the first zalim, zalama haqqa Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. And the last of them. So who's the first one? Doesn't matter what your sympathies, your apologetic sympathies are with. Sitting back and asking yourself academically, intellectually, who would this person be when looking at Shiism and Tashayyu and Imamiyya as it's coalesced from a bird's eye view, understanding the concept of Imamah, the concept of Wilayah, the concept of oppression, the discussion of what oppression is in the Quran, what it means to hide the truth in the Quran, and then looking at the traditions that are available, the devotions that are available, the historical traditions that are available, you come to two possible conclusions. Conclusion number one is when you bring all this evidence together, there's enough cumulative evidence to indicate that the early Muslim community would be responsible. Thus, the early Muslim community would technically, parts of the early Muslim community would be deserving of being deprived of God's mercy. Again, the implications are grand. Again, we're speaking in general terms, not by specific names. The second conclusion would be it's all extremism, it's all fabricated. Jafar al-Sadiq, salamullahi alayhi, Imam Bakr, Imam Rida, Imam al-Kadhim, on and on and on, have nothing to do with any of this. It's all invented. And 12er Shiism, from, let us say, from the time of Safar al-Qummi or before even, Sahib al-Mahasin, al-Barqi, is all an invention going forward. And the religion we have today is complete nonsense. That's the second. Like, these elements of the deen are complete nonsense and have absolutely zero foundation. I find that hard to believe intellectually. I'm not saying that because I want to be a 12er Shi'i. I'm just saying that looking at it from an intellectual perspective as to what the concept of the imamate is, what the concept of wilaya is, you know, okay, if they're not condemned, then what are they? So then are we indifferent towards it? Or do we say, you know what, Allah judged between Sayyid Zahra and those who denied her fadak, for example. Leaving aside the issue of the door for a moment, whether it happened or not, just looking at the conflict between them. Allah judged between them. We don't see that as being the position of our scholars from the very earliest period. Whether it be Mufid, whether it be Murtada, whether it be Alama Hindi, whether it be Shaykh Saduq, and on and on and on. We don't see that position. Now, either the whole lot of them are wrong, the whole lot of them are mistaken, they've invented this religion, and it's time to throw all these books out into the garbage. The religion is and I'm being facetious, of course, here. I'm being facetious. Or it's built on a foundation of an understanding of what Imami Shiism is, based on what the teachings of the Quran and the A'immah are.
I see. Actually, that's a very good answer, because I have another question just from that. When you're talking about the manuscripts of Ziyarat Ashura and the discrepancies and controversies and all this, there are some people that might insinuate that the discrepancy regarding the phrasing of the La'an means that it's not authentic in general. How would you comment on that?
Not at all. I mean, the nusukh and the manuscripts of hadith have so many discrepancies in them. Right? You have got to look at all of them, see which ones are early, see which ones are later, see which ones have ijaza on them, see which ones don't have ijaza, see which ones that have isnad, that don't have isnad. It's a long discussion. We then get into a very technical discussion, which is fine, and we can go into a very technical discussion. I do discuss this in my work at length, but this is where you have to look at two things, right? Among others, which is one, does such a concept fit within the wider belief structure, which is even la'an by ishara? That the concept of la'an by ishara, does that fit within the wider structure of Imami Shiism? One. Number two, the text itself, is it authentic or not? Is there a reason to prove its authenticity? What are the sources, the original sources in which it's found? And number four, or I don't know, I'm not even keeping count now, these are just different factors. The manuscript itself, what is the isnad for the manuscript, for its authenticity, for the date that it was written? How can we verify this? Is there some kind of license or ijaza attached to it? So these are different things to take into account. For example, the edition of Mukhtasar Misbah al-Mutahajjid, which I think is one of the best editions published, edited by Sayyid Hassan Burjurdi, I believe. Let me just check here. I really want to mention this here. edited by Sayyid, yes, I believe Sayyid Hassan al-Burashurti. Yes, Mohamed Hassan al-Burashurti is one of the editors. It's Mukhtasar Misbah al-Mutahajjid. This is the smaller version of Misbah al-Mutahajjid published by Shaykh Tusi. In the introduction, Sayyid al-Burashurti, Sayyid Hassan al-Burashurti, who I know personally is a very good muhakkik and a good scholar, mentions 7 manuscripts that he used in producing this single text. So 7 manuscripts. In there, some have the lan, some don't, and he has a long discussion in here. We don't need to go into it about comparing the manuscripts, which ones are more important, which ones are less important, which ones have isnads, which ones don't have isnads. Now, Sayyid Hassan this is published by Income by Maktabat Alamat al-Majlisi. Let me just Markaz al-Tahqiqat wa Dirasat al-Turathiyya, Ishraf Maktabat al-Alama al-Majlisi. Okay? Now, he has the line. In his edition, he's included it. Sayyid Hassan has looked at numerous manuscripts, right? Some older, some later. So there's many considerations. This is not the end of the discussions, what I'm trying to say here, right? It can be argued, like Sheikh Radi has said, that it's not in there. But then we have other manuscripts that indicate that it is there, right? So, and this is one of the very important works, Mukhtasar Misbah al-Mutahajjid by Sayyid Hassan al-Burashurti. I think he is a very good scholar, a very serious scholar in Qom, the Publication Institute of Alamat al-Majlisi, it's called. And in this, he has the line. Let's just find it here so we can read it for the readers. Shahr Ramadan. It goes by the months. Safar. Okay, let's go to Muharram so that we can find it directly here. So a lot of thought has been put into producing this edition of Ziyarat Ashura. This is not run-of-the-mill. Like, look at the number of footnotes at the bottom of the screen. I mean, there's a lot of footnotes for each page, okay? Manuscript variants and so on and so forth. Let's go to the part of the line. أضم مصابي اللهم اجعلني عندك وجيها بالحسين اللهم إن هذا اليوم اللهم فدائف. Okay, here. اللهم خص أنت أول ظالم باللعن مني وابدأ به أولا ثم الثاني والثالث. Okay, now he has a footnote. Let's go to the footnote here. Footnote number 5. قال مني لم يرد في بعض النسك الكبير زيادة جميع الظالمين. So he acknowledges that in some of the manuscripts, it's added and Allah remove your mercy from all of them. جميع الظالمين لهم. Remember I said at the beginning, in the earliest manuscript, that's the saying. So he's intellectually on it. He's not trying to mislead the reader, right? He includes the discrepancy. في كبير ثم قوله اللهم خص وإلى رابي ثم يردد بي and ba mentions another manuscript. So footnote number 8 والرابع, and he has footnote number 7. So he indicates that there are differences, but then he also explains in the introduction the manuscripts that he considers to be the most authentic, based on his manhaj, based on his understanding of manuscripts, based on years of study and learning, right? I'm not saying that we do taqlid of him. No, this is not a matter of taqlid. It's a matter of research. But there are multiple views on this subject, right? And this is not some run-of-the-mill work. This is a work that there's clearly a lot of work has been put into it. And then he talks about the manuscripts in which it's not mentioned. And he says that it was not mentioned in the copy of Ibn al-Kami lil Taqiyya, right? Out of Taqiyya. And instead something else was written. This is what he says, right? Again, in taking a bird's eye view of not of all, but of numerous. I mean, he had manuscripts, access to hundreds of manuscripts of Misbah al-Mutahajjid. Sayyid Hassan Burashurti, hundreds. I know him personally. I've worked with him. He's a very learned muhakkik and scholar, and the institute itself is very well known. And they put a lot of effort into it, and they have the land, and Ayatollah Makarim have the land, both of them.
Wow.
So I'm not saying that this is the Holy Grail. No,
Mm.
it's debated. Like I said, in my own work, I debate these conclusions. I do. I debate these conclusions openly in my own work. But there is an argument to be made that other manuscripts have it, and we can't deny that and just make this, oh, no, it doesn't exist. No, I don't think so. I don't think that's a fair argument to make. And at the end of the day, manuscripts all have discrepancies.
Yeah.
Because they're handwritten documents from 1,000 years ago, or 800 years ago, 500 years ago. So do you think they're not going to have discrepancies when something is handwritten? It's going to have, just simply from the orthographical perspective, from the handwriting perspective.
That's very fair, actually, because that's a very good point you made. There's thousands of years ago's handwritten, it's going to have some discrepancies, but like you said, majority has the same ultimate meaning. Thank you very much for your answer, Sheikh. I am going to move on to our final question for the episode. Um, if you can sum up, is there like a connection between the language, Ziyarat Ashura, and the early Islamic historiographical sources, would you say?
Yeah, so I mean, I alluded to that earlier on,
Yeah.
and yes, absolutely, there is. There's an exchange of letters between Muawiyah and Mohamed bin Abi Bakr. Maya Yazigi discusses this in one of her works. She was at the University of British Columbia earlier, and I've discussed this at length in my dissertation, in which Muawiyah tells Mohamed bin Abi Bakr. Now, there's two versions of this letter, one on Waqatu Sifin and one on Ansab al-Ashraf al-Baladuri, where Muhammad bin Abi Bakr, the adopted son of Amir al-Mu'mineen, who then became a shaheed, was previously the governor of Egypt. He writes a letter to Muawiyah condemning Muawiyah, openly condemning Muawiyah, basically saying that you're a tyrant, your father was a tyrant, you guys entered Islam, as tyrants, so on and so forth. And it's wajib upon you to accept the haqq of Amir al-Mu'mineen, and how dare you compare yourself to him, basically. Muawiyah writes back, basically saying that if I'm a tyrant, then your father was the awwal zalim. Your father was the first zalim.
Thank you.
وَيُمَحِّدُ, and he paved the way. So so you can take pieces of this letter and literally put it up against Ziyarat Ashura and be like, wow, is this a tafsir of Ziyarat Ashura? Is this a shar? In the words of Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan? Now, the letter can be debated, but it's found as a part of early Muslim memory in Ansab al-Ashraf al-Baladuri and in Waqatu Sifin of Minkari. If it was only in Waqatu Sifin of Minkari, I may say, that's a very Shia source. Ansab al-Ashraf, Baladuri was a court historian, and clearly found this important enough to include in his compilation, which was, I believe, written in the 3rd century, somewhere around the 3rd century, 3rd, 4th century. It's a very early historical source. So clearly there is in Muslim memory, ghulu or no ghulu, leaving aside that for a moment, there is something ingrained within Muslim memory that there were two camps. There's a camp of the partisans of Ali and the partisans of Uthman. The partisans and within these two camps, within these two schools as they developed, there were people that believed, and large groups of people that believed, that the early caliphs, the early first few caliphs, usurped the rights of Amir al-Mu'mineen. And they paved the way for themselves. They built their own kingdom. Bana mulka. He describes them as building their own kingdom. And he says himself in a letter to Muhammad bin Abi Bakr that the fadl of Ali, baraza alayna, that it was made, that Ali's fadl was made clear to us. And they knowingly knew this, and knowingly took his right, and knowingly rejected him. After it being established during the life of the Prophet himself. So he says, if what you're saying is true about me, then it's equally true about your own father. فهو أول ظالم وأسس. And he set this asas of the foundation of this. Now, where do we find these words? Asas, like words related to asas, mahada, dhulm. You tell me, Mohamed Abbas, where do we find words like this? In which ziyarah?
I want to say,
Where do we find that sentence? Do you know?
I don't know. I
Ziyarat
actually don't know.
Ashura. This is all kalam from Ziyarat Ashura.
Oh yeah, yeah. I just
All
thought about
lines
it.
from Ziyarat Ashura. This is vocabulary from Ziyarat Ashura, which we find in the letter of Muawiyah written to Muhammad bin Abi Bakr.
Yeah.
So is this a Shia fabrication put into Ansab al-Ashraf al-Baladuri? Who knows? But the point is that it's in a very early and famous source.
Yeah.
So I don't see how this can all be brushed under the table, under the carpet. If we're going to be intellectually honest about the subject, without insulting, without taking names, without these things, just looking at what the Imamiyya have come to believe and why they have come to understand this, and what that understanding is based on, looking at it from different angles and different perspectives.
Ahsant. Thank you very much, Sheikh. I was thinking Ziyarat Ashura in my head. I promise you. I just thought this is a trick question. Let me think about this. I know it's Ziyarat Ashura, but thank you very much. This is really, really thought provoking for all of our audience. Personally, I found this very interesting, especially when we're talking, like tackling the topic of la'ana and also Ziyarat Ashura, the discrepancies inside it. But unfortunately, at this point, we have reached the end of our show. On behalf of the Blessed Tree Media, myself and the audience, I really would like to thank you, Sheikh Dr. Vinay, for gracing and enlightening us with your precious time and your knowledge and also your experiences. And I'm sure the audience, as well as myself, have really taken a lot away from this interesting episode. And inshallah, all the knowledge that we've picked up, we can use in our daily lives, such as if we have to tackle the topic of La'ana or Ziyarat Ashura, we have a starting point now, alhamdulillah. Inshallah. I'd also like to thank the hardworking team of Blessed Tree Media working behind the scenes for facilitating this live show. Um, and last, but by no means least, I would like to thank you, the viewers, for dedicating your Sunday afternoon and tuning into the show and leaving us some comments and some stories for us. Ahsan to all of you. Now, if you did like today's show, please don't worry. Inshallah, we will be back next week when we'll discuss Dua literature in Twelver Shiaism from the period of the Imams to Sheikh Abbas al-Qummi, again with our respected scholar Sheikh Dr. Vinay Khetia. So please do tune in for that on the 21st of August at 4 p.m. UK time on Blessed Tree Media YouTube channel. As always, please do follow us on social media, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube to watch our shows and get information on any upcoming events that we might have. And also, please do leave us a like, comment, and share. I have been Mohamed Abbas Kirmani, and this is Blessed Tree Media, bidding you all farewell. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Say